Hello, I'm Annette Young and welcome to the 51%, a show about women reshaping our world, coming up. Despite Argentina being a global leader in trans rights, the age expectancy for a trans person is only 40 years old. Our team on the ground report on the discrimination still being experienced by the community. Also, how companies in Benin are seeking to improve conditions for their female employees, particularly for working mothers. And the French female rappers who are now asking men to twerk instead. But we begin in the Latin American nation of Argentina, which has become a pioneer for trans rights. For some 10 years, people have had the right to choose their gender and change their ID papers without needing to consult either a doctor or lawyer. But the trans community in Argentina still suffers from discrimination in education, health and work, with life expectancy just 40 years old compared to the national average of 77. This report from our team on the ground.
Wow, wow, wow.
Juanita is 7 years old and in her room are all the usual things you'd expect. Roller skates, flowers, a dollhouse. But she was born a boy, even though she always knew she was supposed to be a girl. Her mother, Mariana, a little unsure at first, followed the advice of a psychologist to better support her daughter in her transition.
We made the doll with a penis because we couldn't find one in Argentina. It doesn't exist. We made it for her because the therapist told us it would be good for her.
The family lives in Azul, a conservative town with a population of 70,000 people, some 300 kilometers away from the capital, Buenos Aires. Getting the community to accept Juanita's transition wasn't easy.
In some situations, like in hospital, she would get called by her male name. She'd answer, "That's not my name." It stressed her out a lot. So we decided to look into changing her ID.
They contacted a human rights lawyer to guide them through the bureaucratic steps needed to change the little girl's legal gender. Facundo Achaga took on the case in 2020 when Juanita was 5 years old.
I tried to get to know her a bit to see if she saw herself as a girl without being too intrusive. I asked her to draw herself. She drew herself with long hair and a dress.
When the lawyer asked her to write down her name, she wrote Juanita, the name she'd chosen for herself. The procedure for changing her ID papers took just 1 month. That's because since 2012, a gender identity law in Argentina enables citizens of any age to choose their gender and change it as they see fit. Argentina was the first country in the world to introduce such legislation, which even a decade later remains some of the most progressive in the world.
It's not necessary to have the opinion of a psychiatrist or psychologist, because with this law, being transgender is no longer considered a mental illness, and no surgery or medical treatment is required.
Over 9,000 people have officially changed their gender identity since the legislation came into force. Marcela Romero was one of the authors of the law. 10 years later, she's out on the streets to demand that legislators go even further.
El Estado argentino, la democracia, tiene una deuda con la población trans. Los derechos están, y esos derechos se llaman Ley Integral Trans, una ley que va a beneficiar a toda la población trans.
Further legal measures to foster greater social inclusion will be debated in Congress. But although Argentina is a pioneer in trans rights, trans people still struggle to access steady work.
The life expectancy of an Argentinian trans woman is just around 40 because of how excluded we are. We live outside of the system without access to healthcare, housing, jobs, and everything else that other people enjoy access to.
This discrimination can also escalate into hate crimes. In 2020, 129 people were killed because they were trans. Fiorella has had to deal with violence against trans people virtually her whole life. She says it's a part of society.
I lived on the street. I had to do sex work. I didn't finish my secondary education. I couldn't find a job. I've been hugely impacted by this.
Fiorella's story is just one of many. In Argentina, less than a quarter of trans people finish their secondary education, and the vast majority are either unemployed or working on unstable, short-term contracts. Most resort to prostitution to make ends meet. This large financial firm created a network called Pride Connection in 2018. The professional network promotes inclusive corporate policies to help the LGBT+ community to find jobs. Sebastian is one of 2 trans employees working at global financial firm JP Morgan. He was hired in 2020 and supervises a team of some 20 people. He hopes that his example will encourage companies to be more inclusive.
In our society, we don't think that trans people can work in a place like this. Just being here and having a managerial job in a multinational company is in some ways a revolutionary act.
In order for Sebastian's success to become more commonplace, the government has mandated a 1% quota of trans employees in the public sector. Private companies, meanwhile, are encouraged to hire them thanks to tax breaks. It's a measure that once again makes Argentina a global frontrunner in advancing trans rights.
Now, in Benin, some companies are changing the way that they operate. They're taking more notice of the needs of their female employees, a refreshing move in a traditional society that doesn't make it easy for working women. This report from our team on the ground.
Every morning, Karel Sakbo drops off her 3-year-old daughter in a nursery that, unusually, is run on-site at the Beninese company where she works.
It allows me to be more productive at work. Before, she would stay at home, which is an hour away. It was hard to hear from her because I had to wait for my break. Now that she's right next door, it reassures me.
Around 40% of staff here is female. Managers are trying to make sure that family obligations don't negatively affect women's career more than men's.
The young Beninese girls are part of a generation that want to control their future. They're happy to be given this support. It's time for all business leaders to understand that at some point we must participate in gender balance at work.
In Africa, societal pressures can often throw up obstacles to employed mothers. The principles of corporate social responsibility help challenge sexist prejudices that often stop working women from taking advantage of the opportunities that they have earned.
The feminization of leadership allows the company to upgrade itself, especially when the company wants to enter the European market.
North of Cotonou, the management of a construction company has decided to put more women in high-level positions. This electrical technician is the first woman to manage a concrete plant. This engineer is the lead at a construction site in the heart of Benin's largest city.
We have another way of approaching the people we work with, of making them achieve their goals. There is something very pragmatic about women's management. We multitask, we know how to get straight to the point.
Women bring valuable input to the development of our economies. So it's normal that construction companies like ours are feeling the difference.
In Benin, 67% of companies reportedly engaged in corporate social responsibility. But there is still a lot of work to be done in terms of awareness and training. For now, the majority of organizations that have started to implement CSR practices tend to be multinationals, NGOs, and foreign companies.
And finally, when you think of women and hip-hop, people struggle to go beyond the stereotypes of the female dancer who twerks. But women rappers do exist and their numbers are on the rise. France 24 recently headed to the French hip-hop convention in Paris to meet some of the women determined to have their voices heard above the beat.
French hip-hop remains largely dominated by men. But women are increasingly staking their claim on TV, on social media, and on streaming platforms. French-Chilean rapper Lazulai says she's doing it her way.
Just because you're a woman doesn't mean you have to do things you don't want to do to make music.
Women have been present since the 80s, but we never saw them. In the 2000s, no women were signed to major labels. That started to change between 2015 and 2017, coinciding with the Me Too movement.
The Me Too movement reverberated through the music industry. In France, the Paye ta note or Pay Up campaign collected scores of sexist comments made to musicians, while the Balance ton rappeur or Music Too hashtag collected sexual violence accusations against a number of hip-hop artists. Diva, meanwhile, is a social media page which calls out sexual harassment in the world of French hip-hop. It's run by Lola Levent.
In the music industry, women are in danger. It's not crazy to say that. The percentage of women who are harassed psychologically or sexually is enormous, and it impacts their careers.
Levent also lobbies record labels to sign more female artists and reject clichés about them.
In music videos, it's always women that are twerking, never men. But there are men that twerk, I've seen them. I thought it would be cool to switch these roles in my video and to have a man twerk, showing it's not taboo and we're not different.
Rappeurs en Liberté, or Free Female Rappers, is a new competition funded by the government and various businesses. It aims to break down barriers and help the careers of young artists. Last year's top prize winner Issa Yasuke says it opened the door to new opportunities. The award includes €2,000, time in a recording studio, and a brand partnership.
And that's all for now. You can keep up with the 51% on Facebook, Instagram or Twitter. Plus you can catch our previous shows on the France 24 website. So until our next program, bye for now.